So we start with, you're wrong, I'm right. Now let's go from there.
You're wrong, I'm right. You don't want to take that approach, David.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
This is Brittany Haig from Thomas I Group in Atlanta, Georgia, and you're listening to Help Me with HIPAA podcast.
Thank you for that intro. I am David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs and Security First IT, and joining me is Donna Grindle of Cardin. Hello, Donna.
Hello, David.
Did you survive Halloween?
I think that you're asking me that on Halloween only to mess with me. Aren't you?
It's tomorrow. Yeah, so we're in the future, though, right?
I know, we're in the future. We're not going to play that game, brother. I'll get too confused.
So anything interesting happening?
Oh, well, lots of things are interesting that are happening that may not be things that should be shared on our podcast.
Okay.
But yes, staying like crazy busy, trying to take care of so many different things, and real excited about all the different stuff that we're doing. And I got to get you to participate more. I know you're so busy running your own business. God, it drives me crazy.
I know. What am
Silly
I thinking?
you.
Yep. Yeah, time is, wow, it is getting harder and harder to come by.
Fourth quarter goes so fast every year, though. It's just a normal thing that I know. October, it just goes poof. The next thing you know, you're in January, February. So,
Yes, it's true. And then, the whole year's been everybody kind of sitting on hold.
Yeah.
Like, do we do anything? Do we not do anything? So,
yeah. Well, now everybody's just got to do stuff because you just can't wait.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening with us is that, people have been holding off, not doing anything. And now it's the end of the year and everybody's running around. We got to get this done. We got to have something to show for 2020.
Yeah, that's what's happening here. Well, with us, it's assessment season. So, when you back those things up, you're trying to do 30 assessments at the same time. It gets a little challenging. It's like, which one am I working on?
Yeah, no kidding. So, yeah, always challenge, always fun. So, until they come up with some kind of human cloning so I can get me some help that I can depend on. Yeah,
the world can't take extra ones of us. So, there would be, the mutations would become too dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous enough as it is.
Or at least our spouses will tell you that. So, but we do have a great episode. I'm really excited about our interview we're going to do here in just a minute.
Yep. So I had a fantastic interview with Tamika Bass, and we don't want to belabor.
No, get into it because it's great information.
Yeah, so we're gonna dive right into that. Mm-hmm. And but before we do have a couple of things we want to cover. One, as always, thanks to our donors and those people who help keep the podcast on the air, because it's the thing. And then we also want to talk about another way that we get paid, which is through reviews.
Yay! What a great idea.
Yeah. So obviously we're not getting monetary payment, but we do accept a review as payment. So thanks to those people who leave reviews. And so we just had one the other day and I want to bring it up. So it's this was on Apple Podcasts, and the person's name is Josh Christ, which could be his name, could not be his name. Who knows? So whoever username Josh Christ is, thanks for your review. And it reads, and it is 5 stars, of course. And the title is
5 stars.
Entertaining, Insightful, and Actionable, with a big old flame thing coming up beside it. So
we're on fire.
We are smoking. So Josh says, whether you're well-established as a healthcare innovator or just getting started as a catalyst for change, this is a must-listen podcast for you. Donna and David do an incredible job leading conversations that cover a huge breadth of topics related to the ins and outs of building a compliant healthcare ecosystem with leaders who've actually experienced success themselves. Highly recommend listening and subscribing.
Yay!
So there you go. Yep. Thank you, Josh, for listening and subscribing and trying to get all these other knuckleheads to do the same.
That's right. So please pay us.
Yeah. So
we'll throw one little thing out that we don't have it all set up yet, but we have chosen dates that we are going to do the next virtual HIPAA boot camp.
Oh.
Yeah. You committed to them. And
apparently I did.
Yeah, I think you did. So February 23rd, somewhere in there. Yeah, I don't know if we're doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I think. So 23rd, 24th, 25th for a virtual HIPAA boot camp. So last week of February.
Okay, sweet.
2021. I can't believe we're talking about 2021.
I know. I thought we'd be doing this on the moon by now.
I remember that as a kid. So we'll have more information on it, but get it on your calendars. And, I think we're going to try to figure out how to do it for the same price that we did the other virtual one because of what we just talked about. Everybody trying to figure out how to get back in the game, so to speak. So last week of February, 3-day boot camp. We're figuring out what we can do and appreciating the input from the other first version of that team that did the virtual boot camp. So thanks, guys, for that. We're going to do it another jab in February, and I think we're ready to talk to Tamika now.
All right, good deal. Well, let's get to it. So here's our interview with Tamika Bass.
All right, so we're ready to get into the meat of the episode today, and we have a special guest. Tamika Bass is a CISO, and she and I met at Secure World, several years ago in Atlanta, and we have maintained conversations because she, at the time, was the CISO of Georgia Public Health. It seemed, easy for us to talk. I don't know why. And so over the years, just love speaking with each other. And then she did a keynote at the virtual Secure World Atlanta, Charlotte, because COVID. But her keynote was fantastic. I was cheering throughout the whole thing. Immediately, got to get you on to do an episode with us about communication, because that was exactly what the topic of the keynote was about. So, Tamika, we'll let you introduce yourself because it sounds like you got a long resume when I was listening to that guy try to introduce you.
I'll keep it short. So my name is Tamika Bass, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer at the Georgia Department of Revenue. I've been in that role for about 10, almost 11 months now. So it's been really different than my time at Georgia Department of Public Health, where I worked before I came to DOR and as a Chief Information Security Officer. So back then I was on the HIPAA side of things. Now I'm on the revenue side of things. So a very interesting switch, So it was HIPAA, now it's IRS Pub 1075, but it's all compliant. I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to have the opportunity to spend some time with you, Donald. It was great to meet you, David, and let's talk.
Awesome. Well, so for those of you that hear the start off, yes, Tamika is in information security, and you all know that David and I are nerds, but this is not a technical conversation. It is a conversation about talking with technical people. Both sides of the coin. So let's get to, there are so many things that I'm going to just get excited and blurt things out randomly, because the information that you covered is so core to the message we constantly try to get across here. Is it's everybody's responsibility today, and we have to communicate in order for that to happen. So I thought we could start with, your point was, you can't have silos within the organization. You've got to learn to do all these things. And then you've built this important points to communication. And I thought you could cover those in a little overview, and we could go through each of the little pieces a little bit.
Sure. this is really simple, but it's hard at the same time. So I kind of thought through, some of the things, some of the strategies that I've used in my professional and my personal life to improve interpersonal collaboration, communication. And at the core of that is that you really have to build relationships, and you have to focus on building relationships, right? So a lot of people don't, they just go through their day-to-day activities, but they're not really thinking about the relationships they need to be successful. So you have to be intentional about building relationship. And then the other piece you have to do is you have to communicate often. And it's not just communicating via text or via email. It's having those face-to-face conversations, right? Where you can kind of read a person can read you. And I know it's tough right now in the COVID world, but one of the things that I pride myself doing when we have our team meetings is, hey guys, let's turn on the camera, let's see each other, because it really, really makes a difference, right? When you're speaking to somebody face to face, as opposed to speaking to them on the phone or via text. And so much can be misinterpreted by emails and texts and things like that. So, you got to communicate, but you got to communicate using different mediums. The next thing I kind of looked at was really talking the talk, right? And that's kind of really understanding who your customer is, who your client is, and understanding who your clients are, so that when you're talking, and you're communicating, you can really make sure that there's understanding occurs. And then as it relates to my professional life, really, we have to always focus on the organizational objectives. One of the things that I find people do is the reason why people are kind of off in their own world is because they're not looking at the big picture and what the goals are for the organization. If we're all marching to the same place, right, it's easier to march to the same beat, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and you're right in line with where we want to go with all of this. And I love the point that you did in the keynote where you mentioned the first thing you did when you started at DOR on building relationships, that you went around and let's go to lunch. Let's, talk about that just a little bit there.
Yeah. So, coming into DOR was, it was interesting because the CISO that was there at the time, he actually stayed and stayed with me for 3 months and kind of cross-trained me. So that was an excellent experience. But the thing is that he knew everybody. So we would walk around, he would introduce me, but he knew everybody and I didn't know anything, Mm-hmm. So, once the dust settled and he left, I kind of took some time to go back to some of those key personnel and really, take some time to discover not only who they are, but what they do, right? Really understanding what they do and how they contribute to the overall organizational objectives, right? Because, in order to, even though we're in InfoSec, it's still very important that we understand what people do, right? What each department do. And a lot of people just kind of stay in their office and they focus on InfoSec, but they don't really know what the business does. And the business is more important than any other part of our job, right? Because if the business can't function and they can't do the work that they're supposed to be doing, we will never meet our organizational objectives and we'll never be successful.
See, that is right down the, for when you walk in the door, that's one thing, but it's never too late, right, to build these relationships. If you haven't built them yet, or let's say you're having a communication problem. All right, David, how do you go about trying to build that relationship? Now, I know I need to. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to build a relationship that you've known each other, maybe have miscommunications between you? What suggestions would you have for people to go build that relationship today?
The approach that I typically take is I invite that person to lunch. I want to get out of the building. I want to get out of the work scene and I just want to go and sit down with that person and have lunch with them, right? And I want to start that conversation by talking about, them and talking about me and us communicating about kind of like not to get too personal, but understanding what are your likes, what are your dislikes, understanding that person on a personal level first.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we don't have any issues, we can just keep having that type of dialogue, right? But if it is this situation where I'm struggling with that individual as it relates to communicating or getting my point across, then maybe what we want to do is, I'll bring that up, right? And I'll talk to that person and say, hey, this is how I felt when this happened, and I thought it was necessary for us to have the conversation so that we can continue to, build our relationship and continue to meet the business objectives, right? It's important just to let people know, how you felt, right? Because I say this all the time, one's perception is their reality. And a lot of times people don't understand how the other person perceived what you did or what you said, right? And so it's important that you let them know what your perception is, because it could totally be a misunderstanding and you may have taken it wrong. But if you never have that conversation, you never know that. And then that relationship could end up all bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we start with, you're wrong, I'm right. Now let's go from there.
You're wrong, I'm right. You don't want to take that approach, David. Because believe it or not, people can sense that you feel that they're wrong. And that and it could be that no one's wrong, right? It's just, again, our perceptions, we're coming together from two different perceptions and we're meshing those two different perceptions into a reality. So it's really, interpreting what you think about what I'm saying, right? And then what I want you to think about I'm saying, and then where do those two mesh so that we can really have the conversation.
Well,
exactly.
This gets into the hard part of communication, which is the listening piece, because I really think there's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I think that's an indication we should listen at least twice as much as we talk. But when you're listening to somebody, it's very difficult to listen to understand versus listening to respond, which you mentioned in your keynote. And I think that's it's tough, because oftentimes if I'm having a communication or a conversation with somebody and they're talking to me, I might be already thinking like, how am I going to answer this question? And I'm formulating my response, and I miss a good bit of what they're saying because my internal dialogue is just going, a million miles a second.
Mm-hmm. So that takes practice, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I will say, and I'm pretty transparent about who I am as an individual, right? When I talk a lot, I share a lot of my experiences. But one of the things I will say is that early in my career, I struggled really bad with communication as a whole, specifically listening for understanding. And what I noticed is that I would have a conversation, I would be talking to someone and I would cut them off. I was really bad about cutting people off, and I'm still not perfect today. I still do it sometimes, but I'm conscious of it, right? So now what I do is I tend to just sit back and really, really listen. And then I don't respond right away a lot of times. So I went to a executive presence class, and I'll never forget the guy said, you don't have to speak as soon as somebody's finished talking. Mm-hmm. You can take a minute, 30 seconds, 60 seconds to internalize and process what was said before you respond.
Yeah. You have to realize that gap where there's nobody talking, it's uncomfortable, but it's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. And I'm the first to say, hey, I'm thinking about what you said. Let me think about this, put a filler in. Let me think about this and really think about it before you respond. Right. Mm-hmm. Because that's where a lot of the breakdown in communication comes, right? Somebody's talking, the person's not listening, and they're jumping in and they're saying something before they think. So you can't think before you speak if you're talking before the person's finished, got their sentence out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's when somebody's like, I got half a mind to tell you something. You're like, exactly. You have half a mind. If you were listening to me, you'd have a whole mind in this conversation.
Right.
So that gets into the effectiveness. So you build that relationship so that you can be more effective in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, where you talked about how it makes, so many people say, well, it's not about how it makes you feel. It is very much about how you feel is how you will respond to what's happening. And it's like the person that, and I don't remember who I learned this from, but people love to hear their name.
Mm-hmm.
You
Dale
know,
Carnegie.
oh, is that was it? Thank you. Thank
it's,
you.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's one of his chapters.
See, why don't I remember those things? But but people love to hear their name, and it's surprising. Like even when you go to a restaurant, back when we could do that on a regular basis, and have a server come to the table and they tell you their name, and then when they come back, you say, you know, "Hi, David." And it takes them by surprise so often because they're not being recognized, and it makes them feel different. They treat you differently, not like consciously, but they treat you differently because you've taken a moment to recognize them. So this building a relationship and getting to know how they feel when I'm communicating with them, how can I make them feel more comfortable with what I'm teaching them or what I need them to do, or how can I make them feel more comfortable asking me? That's what that relationship's all about, right?
Right.
And so you get to the really communicating part, and then you're hitting on that developing self-awareness piece, which I thought was, I think for all of us, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That self-awareness, like you just talked about. And where is it that, you made that realization of, wait, I'm not listening from one of the courses that you took or a summit or whatever. And we're hoping somebody's learning that today is, how can I become more self-aware? Do you do that just by starting to pay attention to what's happening in the conversations? Am I getting somewhere? Or do you get somebody to sit and talk with you and say, don't do that?
I think for me, it's been experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been in situations where I've learned that if I not only understood my behavior, but understood the other person's behavior and what their expectation was, and I made a small adjustment, we could communicate better or more effectively, I should say. And that, this all this stuff takes practice. But again, back earlier in my career, I was probably the most difficult person to work with. Believe it or not, like all of this has come from experience, because I was a very difficult person to work with. And I had to come to that realization about myself so that I can do better. This was way back early on, like right out of, high school, college, when I started working. And I worked I'll never forget, I worked for the Board of Education. And I struggled in so many of my relationships. To the point where it was just like, I dreaded going to work. But a lot of it, I had to sit back and do some self-examination and say, hey, you're having issues with everybody in the organization. The common denominator is you, right?
That's
and
that
was like a wake up, a aha moment for me. Like, it is me. So I had to kind of go back and monitor and look at my behaviors, my thoughts, my emotions, and how they affect others. And I had to put that in check. I had to really focus on my strengths, because I was always very smart, very articulate. But the fact that I had trouble communicating with people was a barrier for me to really get things done. So I had to focus on my strengths and my weaknesses, and I had to work through that stuff. Really work through that. And that's why this topic is so near and dear to me because I lived this. I was that hard person to work with because I was unhappy. I had some issues. I didn't like the job I was in. I didn't want to be a secretary. I'm not cut out. But, I felt like I should be so much more. So I was angry. And so I was taking it out on I'm telling you, it was such an eye-opening moment. And once I got that in check, once I understood my personality and I started looking at other people's personalities and how I can make adjustments to make my relationships stronger and work, I mean, the sky was really the limit for me. That's how I became successful. That's when things started happening, doors started opening because I understood who I am. And that self-awareness piece, a lot of people take it for granted. They just do.
Well, I, for one, am thrilled that you had that moment because you're so awesome to talk with. And I learned that. I can't imagine you being that argumentative. But yeah, if you're not where you want to be, being mad about it isn't going to get you somewhere else. And yeah, it's one of those things that most people have to have. And while we're talking about this, and we're not talking about anything at all technical, this is something that everybody needs to understand in getting through the processes that we need to get to those goals and those objectives. You know what? I want to have the best product that we can possibly put out. I want the happiest customers. I want patients who feel healthy and excited to work with me. There's a litany of things that we all want. And if we could communicate with everyone better, we're going to get there. And that's exactly what you're telling there. And it's that one point that you made over and over and over is if there's no understanding, there's no communication. And I loved it because so many technical people, and we all know this because we're the technical people trying to learn how to communicate. And, I will say when I teach a course on technical concepts, I know it's hard for me to, and some people say, get it down. And I'm like, no, convert it, translate it into, English. We joke that Carla always says that the technical people, there's 4 on my team, 2 of us are technical, 2 not. They always joke and say, look, they translate us to English. And so how is it, that's part of my self-awareness. I know that fails me, my ability to translate. Mm-hmm. But I work on it constantly, trying to find ways to better communicate technical concepts. And we have to communicate cybersecurity concepts where people don't just blow us off. Yeah, I know I need to use a password. Yeah. It's phishing, blah, blah, blah. It's getting worse. And it's gotten substantially worse. I mean, we just had, I don't know if you saw the alert from CISA about it is credible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the big attack on healthcare is happening. Unfortunately, the headlines all said hospital, but the actual attack said providers. So the doctor's offices don't need to ignore it. But how do we better get people to understand technical concepts? Do you have any tricks that you've used because you're having to communicate that as the CISO? And the stories that you've told before. I love your Dropbox story. I use it a lot. Where you were trying to communicate to the team when you were a CISO at another place. We'll just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. That if you don't want people to use Dropbox, then we need to block it. And what did they tell you and what happened?
So they told me that they didn't want to block it. And so, go just to kind of say, when you say, what do you do, right? Before I elaborate on that story, I think the biggest thing is really to keep it simple, right? It's just keep it simple, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I did is in that situation, I went to Dropbox and I said, hey, tell me what's out there. And they said it was discovered that we had so many people that were sharing, putting sensitive information into Dropbox. And we had no idea because we hadn't blocked it. So, then you go back and you talk to senior leadership, and you keep it simple. Here's what's happening. Here is what could happen if that information is compromised. And this is going to be the effect on the organization, right? And at that point is your decision. But, it's just like, and while you were talking, I was thinking about an example. So I just rolled out multi-factor authentication, right? And so I asked one of the tech guys to craft the email to go out. And it came back and I was like, oh. And I'm reading it and I'm like, no one would understand anything in here. So I redid the email and I started real simple. And I said, people probably don't even know what multi-factor authentication is. How about you start with not saying MFA, not taking for granted that people know what MFA is, because they do not. How about you say multi-factor authentication, put it in parentheses, MFA, and then say what it is at the simplest form. And that's what I did. I said, it's another way of authenticating, right? Or accessing your accounts, not authenticating, because a lot of people don't even know what that word means, right? It's the simplest thing, right? So then I go back and I look at all of these words and I'm like, this is too complex. I gotta dumb. And you would be amazed at the people who reached out to me after that and said, I appreciate your email, because it was very thorough and it gave us the information we needed to do what you wanted us to do. And we had no issues with it. So no, I didn't go out blazing, we're doing an MFA. No, I said, here's what MFA is. Due to the recent attacks that we've seen, right, experienced, or additional threats that are out here, here's what we're doing. Here's why. Here's how it's going to protect you personally. And here's how it's going to protect you professionally. So I gave them the personal piece, because people always want to know what's in it for me. And fortunately in InfoSec, we can correlate things to the personal level. So if I get comfortable protecting my personal accounts, I'm going to do the same thing for my professional accounts. But personally, for me, it hits home. So you got to bring that piece of it in too, not just make people feel like you're telling them to do this and you're not telling them why, and you're not telling them how they're going to benefit from it. They're never going to listen to you.
Well, and then, isn't that one of the differences in the way people see education? Adult education, you have to make it about them, and their experience and why it will benefit them. Kids don't care. You know, that education with the kids, here's what you have to learn. I got to teach you this. This is what it is. And if you take that same approach with adults, you get nowhere. And that's one of the big reasons that we really talk about in your HIPAA training. I don't just tell you what the law says. In fact, I cover the law very little. I have to for certain terminology, make sure everybody's on the same, using the same vocabulary. But then I talk about, why does it matter? Why do we have it? What would happen if we didn't have it? What does it do in your job? Those kind of things are the things that get people to change the way. And I've had people say, I never really cared about HIPAA until I went to your first class. I just thought it was something I had to sit through. Now I see that it really matters with my patients.
Yeah. And your data. And this is what I always say in public health. I would say all the time, your personal data is in one of these systems. Your kids' data is in these systems. Your husband, your family's data is flowing through a Department of Public Health system. And you would never want that information compromised. So you have to protect this stuff like it's your own, because it is your own.
That's exactly it.
It changes. I'm telling you, it totally changes everything when people see what's in it for them. And I agree. I'm a college professor, and I'm always helping people relate to, how do you apply this in your day-to-day activities, your jobs, your personal life, right? How can you apply some of this thing? It's the funniest thing because I've gotten some really nasty emails from students. And I've at times had to remind them, let me remind you what we're learning in this organizational behavior class, right? This type of communication will not get you anywhere. You have to figure out a better way to communicate, even when you're frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember the moment that, and it's like I can't recall the exact trigger that made me realize it, but as a young executive, just like you, way back in the day, and my boss, we had a great relationship, but he just knew I was this little fireball at the time, and if a client said, well, Wayne's at such and such, I would just storm in there and say, what are you doing telling the clients? And that got me a big fat nowhere, And then all of a sudden I changed my approach and went in and I said, I had a client tell me something. And if this is what you want, that's great. But you pay me to advise. It's your business. Tell me how you would like me to handle this. And oh my God, it changed the world.
Mm-hmm.
That emotional response. I always say I learned it to say I'm having an emotional response to a non-emotional event. Is this something that I should be feeling emotional about? And I think that's one of the things that's huge in communication. And you touched on that, the importance of managing your emotions. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that because, and I loved it that your daughter did your think thing that makes a mom sit tall, I'm sure.
It does. Yeah.
But David has a little something. He saw that. I shared it with David, and I want to make sure that David's comment to me about your think thing, I'm going to let you go through the think thing, and then we're going to get to managing your emotions. It's going to be a perfect.
Yeah. So the think thing was very important. It was key for me. So my daughter was one of those people who, always it's like what comes up, what comes out. And at 11, it's pretty hard to manage that. So one of the things I did with her is I sat down with her and I said, you have to think before you speak. Right. And that's when I said, the T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? Right. And so she wrote a story in school and she said, my mom taught me to think. And she put all of the T, is it true? And H, is it helpful? And it was very profound for me because although I was teaching her, I knew that there are areas in my life that I could do better with that too. So even when I'm telling her this, I'm learning the lesson and I'm going back and I'm revisiting that I really have to, think before I speak, truly think before I speak. And that's where that pause comes in, right? You can't think before you speak if you're speaking before other people finish talking, right? And so and it's funny because of what you said, Donna, you said that you changed your approach. You said, I went in and I said, hey, here, that's the T. Here's the facts, stick to the facts, right? That's the T. Is it true? And it is helpful because here's what's going to happen if you don't do it, right? It is inspiring because, again, you have to, make sure you are inspiring people. It's very necessary, but the way we say it is where the kind comes in, right? Yeah. Are we really being kind when we speak? And that it takes practice. It's not something that you wake up in the morning and you know how to do. And as much as I practice these things, there are still times that I have to check myself, right? Because again, as women, I'll just talk about women, we are very emotional creatures. So we have to, David shaking his head, we're very emotional creatures. And at times, our emotions can totally take over us. So we have to come to a place where we know that, hey, right now I'm emotional. Right now I'm feeling this way. This may not be the best time to have this conversation. This conversation might have to wait until later.
It's just called cray cray.
Women, right? Call it
Well, no, David always tells everybody he does a risk analysis every day.
Every
go
day.
ahead. There you go. Tell her about it, David.
Yeah, every time I open my mouth to my wife, I have to do a mini risk analysis to make sure this is worth saying.
Right.
But I looked at your THINK acronym and I was like, why couldn't it just be thin? Why?
Why do I have to be kind?
Why do I have to be kind? I mean, I thought iron sharpened iron, and people just love the fact that you're blunt and to the point.
and unfortunately, they don't. Right. and it was a hard lesson for me too, because that's who I am, blunt and to the point. But I've learned that people judge me by my persona a lot of times. I mean, even at DOR, I had this guy say to me, he's in IT. He said, you should consider taking those letters from behind your name. And I was like, why? He said, because it's just super intimidating. And I was like, huh? He said, when you first came, I was just like, oh my God. But he said, one thing you do, and you're very consistent with it, and I've always been consistent with it, in the workplace, is you speak to everyone. Like, you come around and you say, good morning, hello. It's small things like that help you with that building relationship piece, right? I mean, even when I left DPH, I remember people saying to me, one thing I remember is true. Like, we could count on you bouncing by saying good morning, right? Yeah. So, and all of that ties into, Donald, managing my emotions. And some days I don't want to say hi. I'm dealing with some crap at home. I'm not in the best of moods. But when I've learned that, and I don't have a poker face. I still don't have a poker face. I've been told that I need a poker face. But I just, learn to put all that crap behind, because in the grand scheme of things, it's not that important anyway, probably. Right. So that's where the managing your emotions comes in. Right. Too. So, I mean, that was on my performance evaluation one time. It's like, you need a poker face, because your emotions and how you are feeling is written all over your face. Yeah. Oh. So now I'm in meetings and at least I'm conscious, but you would say something dumb and my eyes would roll in my head like, what in the heck is this guy talking about? I'm not saying it, but because that is a part of communication, right? Yeah. It's only that 97% that is coming out of my mouth. I mean, it's only the 3%, no, the 7% that's actually coming out of your mouth. Yeah. That 93 is your external and how you look and how people perceive you.
That whole thing about, I first have to realize that what you just said, I think is dumb, but you think it's on point.
Right.
So yeah, I have that first reaction. I have to manage it, and I have to go back and think about that because you think it's on point. So I've got to figure out why you think that's on point so that we can move past it, because it's not.
Right.
Yep. Like David said, I'm right and you're wrong, but I can't tell you that.
Nope. Not only can I not tell you that, Donna, I can't make you feel that way either.
Exactly.
Right. I cannot make you feel like you are dumb, because I've been there. Had people make me feel like I'm dumb, and I had to figure out how to let this guy know, hey, no,
don't mansplain me.
Right. But again, we have to go back and we have to practice. This stuff is not easy. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. And for technical people, it's even more difficult.
And that's why it should be thin instead of think. It's so much easier.
David just does not want to be kind. But kindness, think about it though. Donna said it earlier. Kindness takes you a long way. That it's that kind piece. That's what changes the game for us.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about when you have a bad server, as bad as that server is, right? If that server is nice and polite, even though they took 20 minutes to bring your cocktail, right? And you had a rough
so
day.
wrong.
Right. But if they're kind and they're nice and they're professional, right?
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, you're not even going to give them a hard time.
I'm just going to say, bless her heart.
Right. Now get that cocktail. It's been a long day.
Well, I've done that once before with a server who was just, not being kind. And they came back over for like the second time, still not being kind. And I said, I'm sorry, what's your name? And got the name. And I said, are you having a bad day? Are we causing you to have a bad day? And it like flipped a switch.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly they were having a bad day, but they weren't, thinking about how it was coming out. And just simply, I was truly asking because this person was having a seriously bad day.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that before, people working around here, and I looked outside and this guy that was doing the staining on some stuff outside, and he just looked miserable. And I went out there and I said, are you okay? Are you okay? And he goes, he said, how do you know? My wife just left me and took the kids. And it was, taking that moment mattered more to him. And then suddenly he for no apparent reason other than the fact that I took a moment and took him a bottle of water and asked him that. And then suddenly he's doing extra stuff for us. Not that I wanted it. I'm like, no, that's fine. I'll pay you to do that next time. No. I'm going to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's taking that extra moment to realize what's happening in someone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that we as technical people and as HIPAA consultants, we've now learned that part of our job needs to be therapy. We should go back because people are having a hard day enough. And then your job, whatever I'm doing my entire career, was always something that drove them nuts, right? They weren't talking to me because everything was going well.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking that moment, and I think that's something that David is experiencing. We just ran through that with you before we started recording today about how David's got a customer, the person that always took care of communication with the technical team, David's team, left. Now no one in the company knows that communication, and David's company's doing what it's always done and what he expects them to do. But now he's got a client that says, you're not communicating with me properly. I don't like it.
Sounds like it's time for a crucial conversation.
Mm-hmm. Time to lay down the law.
You might want to take this guy out for, lunch. I prefer happy hours, but hey, that's just,
Oh, I'm with you.
Lunch or happy hour, because when you take people outside of that environment,
mm-hmm.
it changes. People are a lot more open to really having these crucial conversations. And then, again, you have to start it off very smooth, just talking about basic things, and then letting that person know what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, because and I guarantee you, he has no idea. I guarantee you, once you have that conversation, things will change because it's going to be an eye-opening moment for him. Like, wow, I didn't know. He probably doesn't even know that you're feeling the way you're feeling about how he's communicating with you and the team. He probably has no idea.
No, I think he's intentionally. I think he's trying to make me feel this way on purpose. I think it's called the emotional high ground. You're trying to put somebody else into an emotional response narrative, so that it makes it harder for them to respond to you. And so,
and that's exactly why you have to manage your emotions.
Right. And sometimes some people are just you just can't communicate with them. Some people are they're just those types of people, right?
Just send them this episode if they're those kinds of people.
Yeah.
One of the things I will say is that I learned, even taking like DISC assessments and things like that, is, when you not only understand your personality, but you understand that person's personality, sometimes there's these small adjustments you can make to make things, to communicate more effectively with that person, right? For example, if you have a person that's high D personality, they're a driver, they want to do everything, then you have to let them do everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, it's a small adjustment, or you have to at least make them feel like they're doing everything. Hey, I wanted to run this by you. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a small adjustment, right? You could probably not care less what they think, but the fact that you're making them feel like you're including them changes the game.
Well, that is one of it was really eye-opening to me the first time I did that with my team, where I had them do it wasn't DISC, because that was, it may have even before that was popular, but because I'm old, but just a personality, defining your personality, and had everybody do it. And let's have a meeting and talk about, tell me what your assessment said. Tell me and explain that to me. And when we all talked about it, we immediately started communicating better. And like the people, there's some people that need to tell you every single detail. My wife being one of them. But it is painful. If you ask me how was my day and I say it was fine, I don't really have anything to report. There was nothing, abnormal, nothing worth news. Not what you're going to get when you ask the other way, because some people need that. That's the way they communicate. So I get it. It's okay. And I can't glaze over and stop listening.
I do a great workshop on that. It's called, we use this thing called the diversity game. And it's the same type of thing where you figure out, your color and and then, we do an activity together, right? And we make sure we got because the key is we need all those personalities to make a good team, right? There's no right or wrong personalities. It's just recognizing and respecting the other person's personalities and making those adjustments.
Yeah. And that is so essential. And it's hard to do when you're young. Very hard to do when you're young.
You should be good at it then, Donna. I
am. I am now. I've been at it 100 years or more. And Tamika, what you don't know is, like, I think it's in our first episode, David told people that I had a pet?
Or a pet T-Rex.
T-Rex or pterodactyl or something. So this is an ongoing banter, we'll call it. But one thing, and this is great, and in fact, we've already talked to Tamika about bringing her back and doing another episode soon on communicating with leadership and how to take all of these technical cybersecurity, compliance, privacy stuff that we have to communicate with leadership and figuring out how to put it into something that they will better respond to. But I want to make sure there was a very good point you made in the Q&A session after your keynote of where you took a room full of technical people and you put doctor's notes up on the screen. And I was like, I love it. So talk about, that was a perfect example in our world, in healthcare, that I want David to really hear about, because I think he'll love it too.
Yeah, I think I did a talk one year at Secure World called I See What You Say. And it was all around helping technical staff communicate with non-technical staff. And so typically when I do a talk, I usually have what I call my quick start activity, right? It's that activity that kind of brings you into the room and brings you into what we're getting ready to talk about. And so that quick start that year was when I put up that doctor's note and I said, hey, you guys take a minute and read this. And it was like, no one could read it. And so, you had a few people saying, as needed. Most people knew what that meant in the doctor's note. And I said, see, think about this. This is exactly how people in your organizations that are non-technical, this is exactly how they perceive what you're saying or what you're writing to them. They totally don't get it. So we have to, and that was the intro into how do we communicate effectively with non-technical staff. And so I gave all of these examples, and then we talked through it. We said, let's do it. Let's communicate with some non-technical people, exactly. And let's see what you did wrong. A lot of us, we use these acronyms and we think people know what these acronyms are, and they don't. Sometimes I don't know. I'm like, I don't know it, but I'm not ashamed to say, hey, give me that. What does that mean? Let me stop you. I don't know what that means. And I work with some super, super technical guys. Some of the smartest guys, but they don't do a good job of communicating, nor do they want to communicate with the business. They just would prefer not to. And so I think that's why we have this new role now called the BISO, right? That person that's supposed to be that interacts with the business and InfoSec. Like, come on. We didn't need this third layer. We just got to get these things right.
Because that creates a bottleneck.
Right. Like, okay. But there's a lot of organizations out there that's doing it.
Yeah. And for me, I would prefer that the technical people learn to communicate better because they will communicate with each other better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that they're wrong. Their brains work differently. That's why they're technical.
Mm-hmm.
I
will hire somebody based on their interpersonal skills and their behaviors in a minute.
Yeah.
I don't care what you know, because I can
teach you that.
But you have to know how to communicate, and you have to know how to communicate with not only our internal team, but our external team, our external partners, our external customers, our internal customers. You have to be able to communicate with everyone, or I can't have you on the team.
Yeah, that's it. So what do you think, David, about your communication with your problem?
I'm going to take him out, get him plastered drunk, and then we'll have a conversation.
Not plastered drunk. Because then you might find out some things you don't want to know.
No, right?
Casually.
When he starts going, as soon as he gets to the point where he's like, I love you, man, then we'll have a conversation.
You'll be surprised. You'll go in, and then when you go back in Monday morning, you'll be like, hey, David, what's up? You guys are doing an excellent job, man. Like, what? How did this happen?
Yep, I know.
Well, and it does. We've learned how to make it work with Zoom happy hours and Zoom lunch and all of those kind of things, as well as socially distanced ones outside. So, we can still do that as we're getting through this pandemic and not lose our ability to communicate with each other. And your ideas are just fantastic. And I'm sure that our listeners will see why I wanted you on. And David already does, because he's listening and being very thoughtful, I can tell.
Thinking before I speak.
Written all over your face, David.
Well, it's a place that we all end up in at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited that you're going to come back and talk with us. And do you want to share how people can connect with you on LinkedIn? That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
If you want to share or connect with Tamika, I will leave it to you if you offer any other methods for connecting, because your job isn't like ours. but I can't thank you enough for being here and being willing to just chat with us.
This was fun. I appreciate you guys for having me. Thank you so much. I mean, I like talking about this stuff. I'm passionate about this stuff. This has made my weekend. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to next time. I'm actually looking forward to it.
I know other people are like, you want to talk to them again? Really? All right. So I think we'll be sharing as much possible of your, I'll put the think little diagram that you used. I'll put that out in the show notes for folks. But otherwise, is there other places that you post things that people can get information, or just count on you coming back to visit us?
Count on me coming back to visit you. I mean, I don't post a lot on LinkedIn. I don't. I probably should, but I don't post as much. But that's something that I probably should be doing in the future. So
yeah,
I'll look into that, because I do have a lot of information. But
well, feel free to let me know, and you can post on my company blog anytime you want.
Okay, will do. I will do that for you, Donna.
All right, then. Thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to having you back again soon. And we'll just have a regular segment, so it'll be Tamika Say What?
Right, Tamika said.
Well, we have our HIPAA Say What episode segment of our show now. We skipped it today because you were here, but we'll have to create one that is Tamika Say What.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, we can do that. Tamika,
right.
say what?
I like it. Say what? I like it.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. And David, you can do your closeout routine.
All right. That is our show for today, folks. Thanks for listening. And please share us out on your favorite social media site. We love it when you do that. And you can also follow Donna in the dark or online, either way. So remember, for Donna and myself and Tamika as well, HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.